Welcome back to another video on the channel. The men's Grand Slam title race just got even more interesting. As you all probably know by now, Novak Djokovic closed the gap on Rafa Nadal and Roger Federer to 2 after winning his 18th Grand Slam title at the Australian Open. I think it was very much needed win for Djokovic, which I'll talk about later on in the video. But for now, I'm going to focus on Roger Federer. So Federer returns to the court next month. The last time we saw Federer play competitive tennis was at the 2020 Australian Open. At 39 now, recovering what seems to be a very serious knee injury, it's a complete unknown how he'll perform. I think it's worth saying that Federer wouldn't come back to the tour if he didn't want or think that he could still compete at the very top level. But I'm very interested to see how Roger copes on the hard courts next month against top young players. Wimbledon will be played in 2021, and I think that's probably Roger's best chance of winning another Grand Slam title. Reasons being that he's won 8 Wimbledon titles, he reached the final at Wimbledon back in 2019, which is obviously the last Wimbledon we got. And the next gen players are at home on hard courts, and they won't have played any competitive tennis on grass in 2020 to prepare. So I think, especially for 2021 Wimbledon, you have to favour Djokovic, Nadal, Federer and Andy Murray if he's fit, because they've all won Wimbledon titles and they've got experience of playing on the grass, which is a difficult surface to adapt to. Away from Wimbledon, I can't see Federer winning the Grand Slam title. I think the French belongs to Nadal, and the level from the last 16 onwards in Grand Slams now is incredibly high. Djokovic is still as good as ever. Nadal still reaches the late stages of Grand Slams consistently. Daniil Medvedev's now reached 2 Grand Slam finals. Stefanos Tsitsipas a semi-final and won an ATP finals. Zverev reached the US Open final last year. Dominic Thiem won the US Open last year. You've also got players like Rublev, Auger-Aliassime, Shapovalov, Sinner, who are continuing to improve with experience and maturity, and are also at home on a hard court, so are capable of upsets and deep runs at Grand Slams. I just can't see Roger at this stage recovering from a serious knee injury, 39-year-old, and beating 3 or 4 of those players in 5-set matches at one event. Maybe I'll be proved wrong, but if I was to predict how many Grand Slams Roger will finish on, it would be 20. Just for the fact that I think the hardcore Grand Slams now are so competitive and difficult to win. I think Djokovic has to be a big favourite going to Wimbledon, and Nadal basically rules the French. So I'm going to predict Roger to stay on 20 Grand Slams for the rest of his career. Now, moving on to Rafa Nadal, who is obviously also on 20 Grand Slams, locked at the top with Federer. Nadal's still fighting very hard on the hard courts. You know, for the last 3 hardcore Grand Slams, he's won 1 at the US Open back in 2019 when he beat Medvedev in the 5th set decider in the final. And he's also reached 2 quarterfinals, losing out in close matches to Dominic Thiem and Stefanos Tsitsipas at the Australian Open. I think the next gen in team are certainly capable now of beating Rafa at a hardcore Grand Slam, which we've seen. But Djokovic still seems to be a level too high for everybody. As I mentioned, I'd make Rafa one of the favourites at Wimbledon due to his win experience there, but I think Djokovic and Federer will be more likely winners just because that they've won the event so many times and they're more suited to the grass courts than what Rafa is. So last year I made the fatal error of going against Rafa Nadal at the French Open, and I'll promise to not make that mistake again for as many times as he turns up. If he was ever going to lose at the French, I think last year was the year, which is why I predicted him not to win it. Rafa had next to no preparation for that event. The conditions are very different, with the tournament being played in October, was it, rather than May-June time. There was a change in the balls for that event. Djokovic and Thiem were playing some fantastic tennis in the lead up, but Nadal proved me completely wrong. You know, he cruised the event and destroyed everyone, including Djokovic in straight sets in the final. Now, these videos are purely my opinion. You know, Nadal could go on playing till he's 40 years old, but I just get the feeling that Nadal won't. You know, I think he's a person that wants to start a family. He wants to cruise around the world on his £100 million yacht, which you can't blame him for, and he really wants to enjoy his retirement. I think Nadal will play for another couple of years. I think he'll try and get to 15 French Opens. He's on 13 now. He'll surpass Federer's record at the top of Grand Slam lists and call it a day at around 36, 37 years old. That's just purely my opinion, as I say. I think Thiem, Djokovic and Medvedev have a slight edge over Rafa now on hard courts, but he's as good as guaranteed at the French Open for as long as he turns up. This year at the French, he does have the added pressure, as it's his big chance to take over Federer for the first time and go to 21 slams. But if I was to make a prediction on how many slams Rafa will finish on, I'm going to go for 22. As I say, I think he goes on for another couple of years, takes another couple of French Opens to get to 15, and retires when he gets to 22 Grand Slams. I do think he's got a chance at Wimbledon, but as I say, you do have to make Djokovic and Federer favourites. And at the hard court, I just think the likes of Thiem and Medvedev and Djokovic might have his number now. But Rafa's always got that fighting spirit and brilliant tennis that he can bring to the court, as he showed in 2019 US Open. But I'm going to predict Rafa to finish his career on 22 Grand Slam titles. Now, finally, moving on to Novak Djokovic, and I've always favoured Djokovic in this Grand Slam title race argument for three particular reasons. The first one being he's the youngest, which just makes sense. He's got the most time to reach the top. Second being that he's the favourite at 3 of the Grand Slams. And if Rafa went out the French, he'd probably be favoured there too, alongside Dominic Thiem. Djokovic is a player over the years that's learned to adapt his game on different surfaces, and he wins titles on all different surfaces throughout the years. He's the outright favourite 100% at the US Open and Australian Open with his recent record on hard courts. And also he's won the last 2 Wimbledons, and I think he goes into Wimbledon this year as a big favourite too. And the final reason is because that he's chasing. I always feel that it's better to be chasing a record rather than setting it. If you have something to aim and train for and a clear target to go for, then I always think it's better. Once Nadal retires being the older player, then Djokovic will know the number that he needs to get to, and he'll be able to thrive and manage his career around that. So at the start of 2020, Rafa had 19 Grand Slams, Roger had 20, and Djokovic had 16. I made Djokovic a big favourite then, as I expected him to win 2 or 3 Grand Slams in 2020, Nadal to take the French. So at the start of 2020, Djokovic won the Australian Open, Nadal won the French obviously. Wimbledon didn't happen, and Djokovic got disqualified from the US Open. So there's 2 opportunities there for Djokovic to really close the gap that were missed. One not being his fault at all, with Wimbledon being cancelled. The US Open very much being his fault in getting disqualified. So I think Djokovic has to make up for last year by making ground on Nadal and Federer this year. So to start the 2021 by winning Australia is massive. Sends out a statement. He's got 1 Grand Slam title on the board already. If he can add Wimbledon or the US, perhaps even both, then he's guaranteed to make up ground on Nadal and Federer in 2021. So the 2 key reasons on why I think Djokovic will finish with the most Grand Slams. Every year we seem to be talking about the next gen takeover. Thiem winning the US Open in 2020. Medvedev came to this tournament at Australia Open with an unbeaten streak, playing the tennis of his life, winning the ATP finals. Zverev reached the 2020 US Open final. And there was lots of talk this year about whether this was the year of the takeover and the next gen players would come through and start winning Grand Slam titles. Skip to the Australian Open 2021 final. Medvedev was 20 matches unbeaten going to the final. He'd walked to that stage of the tournament playing some fantastic tennis, the best tennis of his career. A ready-made Grand Slam champion, everyone was saying. And Djokovic hadn't played his best at this event. He suffered an injury in round 3. And I'd say most people and pundits were predicting Medvedev to win that final. But Djokovic has showed why he's by far and away the best player in the world, reinstated his dominance. And I think it was just a statement for the rest of the year and beyond that he's going absolutely nowhere yet. He didn't just beat Medvedev, it was a straight sets lesson. And I think people always underestimate Djokovic's mental ability to produce his best in finals. And he just outclassed Medvedev in every single department, mentally and physically. So now we have to make Djokovic a big favourite for Wimbledon and the US. And the second reason why I think Djokovic finishes with the most is that his serve has improved so much over the past couple of years. He served well over 100 aces at the Australian Open, which is very unlike Djokovic in the past. And I think arguably he's got one of the best serves in the world right now. So important as you get older to pick up 3 points in shortened games. We've seen Roger do it as well over the years. And Djokovic seems to have that in his game now. So as well as being the best defensive and counter-puncher player in the world, he's also got one of the best serves, so it makes him nigh impossible to beat on a fast hard court, which is what he showed at the Australian Open, despite not being at his best at times. So again with Djokovic, as I mentioned with Federer and Nadal, I don't know how long you're going for, but from listening to his press conferences over the past couple of years, I think everyone knows the importance and how much he wants to finish with the most slams. And now he's going to pass Federer with the most weeks as well, number one. He can really prioritise that and produce his best at Grand Slams and organise his calendar around peaking at Grand Slams events. So I expect Djokovic to go on for another 4 or 5 years and give it absolutely everything to get to the top and set the bar as high as possible. And as I said previously in this video, I think he's favoured for three of the four slams every year, and I don't see that changing for 3 or 4 years yet. Djokovic's level certainly isn't decreasing. His serve is as good as it's ever been, and of course he could lose to a team or a Medvedev in a one-off match. But I just think Djokovic's experience and mentality is unquestionable, and it will always give him the edge over those younger players like Tsitsipas and Zverev and Medvedev. Those young players that I just mentioned will obviously improve with experience and maturity, but enough to beat Djokovic at a Grand Slam event, I'm not sure. I just think Djokovic is a different animal, and the level that he can produce at the back end of Grand Slams is frighteningly good, and I'm not sure anybody can compete with Djokovic in the next 3 or 4 years if he can compete and stay at the level that he's at the moment. I think if Djokovic stays fit, he wins 2 or 3 Grand Slams every year for the next 3 or 4 years and finishes on 24, 25 Grand Slams. And that might sound unrealistic, but I don't think Federer and Murray will ever reach the very top ever again. I think Djokovic has Nadal's number on hard court and grass. Dominic Thiem does have that win experience now and pushed Djokovic in the 2020 Australian Open final. But can he play like that every year? It's still a huge question for me. He did disappoint this year's Australian Open, which wasn't a great start for his 2021. Everyone else I just don't think is consistently good enough or can mentally beat Djokovic. Maybe they can provide a shock at a odd event, but overall I think Djokovic will dominate slams for the next 3 or 4 years, particularly on hard courts, and can finish on 23 to 25 Grand Slams. So I'm going to predict Djokovic to finish with the most Grand Slams once all this is over. Please let me know your comments in the comment section below. Like and subscribe the video as well. It is always much appreciated, and I will see you on the next one.